Welcome to the William & Mary Center for Innovation and Learning Design Virtual Summit on Deeper Learning. When we're designing a school, or more often, shifting a school to promote deeper learning practices, can mean a lot of change. Instructional practices, the way we interact and relate with students, the rituals and routines of our school, and even some of the basic structures sometimes have to change to incorporate deeper learning in a meaningful way in a school. Obviously, this can be a challenge. Fortunately, today, we have an expert in scaling innovation and change across organizations, Ted Fujimoto. He's the president of Landmark Consulting Group and has been instrumental in the development and spread of the New Tech Network and Big Picture Learning, two charter organizations that are focused on implementing deeper learning principles. So Ted shares today a lot of great ideas, a lot of things to think about in relation to school climate, culture, and rituals, how we can calibrate our deeper learning practices with the best schools in the world to help us to move forward, the important role of advisory, not just for students, but also for teachers, and then the idea of it's inevitable that we'll encounter challenges, but how can we overcome those? How can we pivot and learn from that experience? So as you watch the video today, I hope that you will tweet at WMSILD, at Ted Fujimoto, use the hashtag SILDSummit, and share your reactions, ideas, and questions. We know that you're going to have some great takeaways from today's interview. Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Ted Fujimoto today. Ted is the president of Landmark Consulting Group, a management and investment consultancy for scaling innovations in learning, which just sounds awesome. His clients include some of the most prominent foundations, investors, and innovators that span across education. They've helped to design and create the replication systems and strategies for a lot of the largest, scalable, fastest growing, high performing public school designs across the country. New Tech Network, Big Picture Learning. I know I had the opportunity to, out at the Hewlett conference in December, to meet some of those folks and hear their stories and hear what they're up to. So I followed Ted for years on Twitter, and I thought, I did see the connection. So I'm so excited to talk with you, Ted. You've got such a great background. Thanks for spending some time with us today.
My pleasure.
All right.
Thank you.
So, you have in this the summit on deeper learning, we're talking with classroom teachers, some folks that are focused on sort of the academic side of educational change. You have a different background, which is as an entrepreneur and educational transformer. So I wanted to start just by saying, like, what in your experiences led you to be so passionate about innovation and education in particular?
Well, a very practical one. I actually ran a technology company in Silicon Valley in the late 80s, early 90s, and I moved the company to Napa, where I'm from. And there were about 6 other biotech and tech companies that all decided to do that because, Napa Valley, what a great place to live.
Absolutely.
I'm from there. It's a great environment, right? The only problem is it's a farm town. And our ability to even hire admin assistants that had the skills we needed to grow, it was pretty dire. And we would go to dinner and have drinks with the company owners, the tech company's owners, and we would complain because we would see the same interview pool going between all our companies, and we couldn't hire any of them. It got to a point where we literally were thinking about saying, we're probably going to have to move in about a year because we won't be able to survive here. Even though this is a great place to live, we won't be able to survive. We ended up going to the school board and asking them, well, we're out of here. We need a solution. We need workforce. What are you going to do about it? And somehow they kind of threw it on our lap, and they threw it in my lap of what do you want to see. And quite frankly, I am one of those kids who hated school. I played the game. I knew how to kind of crack the code and get through school as quickly as possible with the least amount of effort. And it was, there was so much of the school experience. I was in all kinds of school environments, from a single room country schoolhouse to private tutors to overseas schools to more traditional schools, and none of it worked for me. And so I had nothing really to glean from other than I didn't like what I had at school. But in my company, we had teams that would take on these amazing challenges. using brand new technology, new sectors they've never worked in before, and they would keep winning awards. They would they would come up with solutions that would be on time, on budget. They had solutions that were demonstrated in Microsoft Executive Briefing Center and at IBM, and just stuff that they would always consistently do some amazing stuff. So what we did was and this is where the DNA of the first Napa, the new technology high school came from, Napa New Tech, where literally we say, we don't like lectures. Let's get rid of all lectures, and everything's going to be projects. And by the way, you're going to use projects the way that we manage our projects to develop these innovative teams. And we literally copied our protocols and our actual server, which was based on Lotus Notes in those days. And we literally copied that and dumped that into the brand new high school. Now, one of the real critical parts of why these teams were so effective was their culture, how they created agreements with each other, how of trust, respect, responsibility, how they worked together. All of that was embedded and was a foundation to be able to do this amazing work. So that was also part of that DNA. Well, we wanted workforce, and we had no idea what we were doing. So we said we're going to start a high school that's the 11th and 12th grade. Okay. End of the pipeline, right? Well, what kind of kid do you think shows up, switches in the middle of high school experience to go to a brand new school that doesn't exist, right? So we end up with a bunch of C average and below kids who've been struggling all their lives, and they figured, what the heck? At least they might have some technology, and we have nothing to lose. Right. Well, long story short, without teaching to the test, without any lectures, with just doing this project-based learning, it wasn't even a term back then. 9 months later, these kids outscored on the standardized tests by 10 to 15% in every subject area. Wow. We had to kick kids out of the building at 7:30, 8:30 at night because they wouldn't leave. Wow. And that, then I got kind of upset because we literally did not know what we were doing other than let's just create an environment that we found works before. And when kids that were failing all their academic careers succeeded even above their peers by a major magnitude, it's like, well, we've got to do this nationally. We've got to do this at scale. Right about that time, I was part of a venture group that acquired a consulting company that came up with the whole Saturn car company retailing concept and re-engineered 11 automotive retail brands and hospitality brands worldwide. And that business problem was, how do you get a bunch of redneck, bullheaded, stubborn auto dealers to do something completely different? Their employees, their buildings, their capital, and how do you replicate that 1,100 times in a 7-year period? Or like a Ritz-Carlton, how do you double the number of locations? Almost all of them are in foreign countries you've never done business before, and most of those are on islands where you're hiring the majority of the workforce who live in huts. And yet on day one, you have to deliver a 5-star world-class experience. How do you do that? And it's a whole idea of how do you replicate culture and mindset, not just the practices. And I learned so much from that company and that team that had been doing this and really led the field in this area of how do you replicate culture and mindset. And the New Tech Network and the Big Picture Learning Network, some of that DNA comes from Ritz-Carlton around how do you do this work. So from the very beginning, once we had tried a few schools in different contexts, we planted an urban school. They became second highest performing school in the city in under 2 years. We planted a rural school. They were top 2% to the top of the state. We planted one of the worst schools in the state, and the graduation rates went from 20% to 90%. Discipline issues went from fights and lockdowns every other week to basically one fight in 3 years. Wow. Huge results like that. It's like, okay, now we know this works. Now it's time to scale. So that's kind of how some of these replication scalable designs came from.
It's a great origin story. I almost feel like it's like a superhero story, to figure out where it started and where it came from. I love how it originated out of this really practical need, but then grew in that idea that if it can engage kids that have not had success all the way through 10 years, 11 years of schooling, and then all of a sudden ignite something in them, I mean, that's a really powerful thing. And one of the things I want to really kind of drill down on that you just mentioned, we've heard, especially the last 10 years or so, 15 years, we heard a lot about 21st century skills, and they tend to be very skill focused, and like these are the skills that employers are looking for. But one of the things that really resonates with me, and you see it in new tech, you see it in big picture, is the culture and mindset that you're talking about. That it's not just about the activities that the kids are engaging in, the skills that they're doing. It's a whole different mindset and framework, and that's, I think, what makes it really like a deeper learning approach. So could you talk a little bit more about that? I think that's something that might be new to folks, especially, and I guess one other thing to point out, as we were talking before we started recording, that these are in district high schools and district schools. These are not, necessarily private schools, charter schools. So, could you talk about
charter schools? Yeah, charter schools just started to adopt these school designs within the last couple of years.
Yeah, and that was completely. I missed that entirely. So I think that's really fascinating. So it's like, how do you do that? How do you build that kind of culture and that mindset in a school that's maybe been in operation for a while? And how do you translate that and build towards that idea of deeper learning?
Well, there are two kind of major buckets that have to work together for that to happen. So let's talk about what happens right kind of at the ground level. So 21st century skills oftentimes is couched as kind of these independent rote skills that somehow you have to communicate better.
Right.
Okay. And it's akin to at a Ritz-Carlton or hotel is you have to smile at guests. Okay. And there's some hotel groups that have what we jokingly call a smile policies, where you have so many seconds to look your guests in the eyes and walk in the door and smile at them. Well, what happens if you run into a guest in the elevator? Or what if you're the housekeeper and you run into a guest in the hall? Well, all of a sudden you have this smile policy manual that is an inch thick of all the instances of how you need to smile, with the notion of somehow that skill helps make the guest feel more comfortable and more welcome. Well, we know when things are that rote, we know it's fake.
Right.
And we also know it's impossible to measure. And there are times where it is inappropriate to be smiling at a guest. Like, that a family member has passed away of that guest. You're not going to smile at them. How are you? Cheery, right? You know something that you've got to act on. And it becomes this very obtuse kind of thing. So Ritz-Carlton takes a very different approach, and it is a very high-level principle of ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. And it is a mindset, and you can't inspect for it, like, oh, were you a lady, gentleman serving lady and gentleman right at that moment? But it's a mindset, and the way that you make sure that people have the right mindset is you expose them to it, you calibrate them to it. So, for example, 15 minutes, 3 times a day, for 15 minutes, worldwide, teams get together and they discuss this mindset. And they talk about how it's a very simple protocol. The reflection period, how I demonstrate this mindset of ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen, how we as a team have done, how I as an individual could do better, how our team could do better. And the very best story is curated out of that group and sent up worldwide. And within a few days, the very best stories of how this is really demonstrated worldwide, everyone hears the same stories. And that's what we call a calibration. It's about, oh, that's what this means. Because when everyone says, you are empowered, you tell a student, you are empowered. You tell a teacher, you are empowered. Everyone says, well, I know you have the intention of, but how far are you willing to go before I get in trouble or worse, get fired? So everyone kind of, based on their own personal risk tolerance, they test that. Some over the line, some never really testing the boundaries at all. And that's very inefficient and ineffective, because the result is that everyone kind of dummies down to the lowest common denominator, right? So calibration allows people to aspire to something. It's like, wow, that's what that really means, and I won't get in trouble, and that's actually being celebrated that I actually did that for a guest, and that is exemplary. It completely starts to open up the possibility versus always obsessing of what the minimum bar you have to hit.
Right. Yeah. So like, how do you help? Especially, I'm thinking of like an existing school and existing staff. How do you help them to develop that mindset and that shift in their thinking? And then how can they then communicate that to the students in a meaningful, authentic way?
So we kind of boiled back to those two the concepts. I haven't covered the second one. They have to go hand in hand. But to complete the first one, it's about having rituals and time and space to actually calibrate what the intention and the spirit and the mindset is. Mm-hmm. It's not about lecturing, be friendly, be a lady and gentleman, because everyone has different perspectives on what that actually means, right? Be a good parent. Well, some people haven't had good parents, so it's hard to judge. So the other piece of this is so having the sacred space and time where teams of people can calibrate, and not just calibrate among themselves, but calibrate with the most exemplary practices of what this actually looks like. The best schools don't even have to be within the education environment, right? But it's how people organically relate to each other and able to do amazing things together. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is that there are many structures and policies and conditions in a organization structure like a district or a school that you could put into a bucket as toxic to that culture, or neutral to, or supportive of, right? And every organization has even inadvertent things. Like, I'll give you one example. If we so much believe in personalized learning for an individual kid, and we say that, and that's posted up above the boardroom and all of that, just the notion of having a pacing guide, mandatory pacing guide for a district, flies in the face of that. Try to do personalized learning, project-based learning, or whatever the heck that is, with a pacing guide, it completely at conflict. Yep. So that's a very simple, but how inadvertent things can really get in the way. And all of a sudden you see projects starting to map toward how do you work with the pacing guide and create projects around the pacing guide? Right. Well, you just completely missed the whole notion of personalized learning and project-based learning in the first place, right? It can be even more subtle. Right. Like with New Tech and Big Picture, they have some mandatory professional development and coaching sessions, especially with new teams launching schools. And it's such an important week-long to 2-week period that this is how you calibrate together and really work out the plan, saying, okay, we're going to open our doors, and this is what it takes to implement with fidelity, and we have enough practice, we build teamwork, all that, right? And the district has a mandatory professional development set of days that overlap on that. Well, if you look at the actual topics, they might actually be great things that teachers can definitely benefit from. But who decides the exception of, oh, these teachers don't have to follow that, they have to do this other thing, right? And all of a sudden you run into this policy conflict. So so this goes to not just innovation or culture. This also goes to creativity and just implementing anything, any good program. Is that it is like taking a freshwater fish and dropping it in the saltwater ocean. Everybody dies. It's a matter of time if you don't have the right protections. So some fish last longer, some fish die quickly, depending on their strength. But even a great principal can only stick their neck out so many times over a 10-year period before, it's either they're out of survival, they're going to leave, or they get pushed out. And we see this over and over and over again in education. So one of the pieces that's been greatly missing in the idea of creativity, innovation, all that, is what are the policy and structural conditions that are needed that protect and are not toxic to that innovation, and how can you ensure that regardless of changes in school boards, changes in superintendents, changes in leadership, that those practices are baked in, and that resilient, and that's how you create resiliency.
Yeah, and that makes so much sense, because we all can identify these really innovative teachers trying to push the boundaries, but if they're working in a school or in division that maybe is supportive in theory or supportive spiritually, but if they constantly run into those problems with a disconnect with the culture, disconnect with the norms and the values, that it's going to be extremely difficult. So how I love the idea of rituals and the idea of calibrating. So have you found structures that are helpful in helping to teachers to calibrate with each other to kind of move towards that shared vision if there isn't that culture already in place?
So I think if there were a culture or a pair of culture items that are I've seen have a profound effect, it is around the use of advisory time, both for student advisories as well as professional advisories. But advisories mean so many different things to so many people. Sometimes it's just free time to just kind of figure stuff out. But if it's an advisory around, for example, teachers talking about student work, but calibrating that work with the very best projects out there in the country, or calibrating their projects that they're designing with kids or for kids, and calibrating it does this meet the gold standards of authenticity, of the rigor of what needs to go in that project? All of a sudden, then that becomes a calibration exercise, not just, okay, let's just inspect for this, right? And the same thing with students and teachers having a student advisory where they are talking about how they're feeling as a human being in that building. It's like, are you struggling? Are you doing well? Where do you need help? And not just academically, but emotionally, physically, because all the time that gets in the way of the academics.
Absolutely.
Right? And by going around the room and saying, on a scale of 1 to 5, how do you feel about your life today compared to last week or yesterday? And kid says, I was a 5, but now I'm like a 3. Well, what happened, right? And then you can build a support group around that kid where, okay, talk to their peers and say, what advice can you give so-and-so, right? And if there is something so really a big issue, then that requires some professional intervention, then that's where the facilitator can bring in. So let me introduce you to a counselor. Let me introduce you to so-and-so who can help you with this, right? And out of that group, the other calibration is that communication, where if there's any major things that the rest of the school needs to know, as far as other teachers that will be interacting with that student, within 15 minutes, that information can be disseminated. So if the kid is falling asleep in class, instead of getting in trouble, it's like, this is what happened. She was sleeping in the hall because her mother was getting beat up last night. I mean, that literally came out in one of the schools. And all of a sudden, it completely changes the lens and the calibration of why this kid's not lazy. She's tired.
Absolutely.
So give her a break today, And that inspires and builds on the culture of trust, respect, and responsibility.
I think that idea of empathy for the students is so important. And so I think as kids have been reduced to data points, I think in a lot of schools and a lot of districts, that can be lost. And that's not why anybody comes to education. Teachers come to education because they want to support and nurture and help kids grow and develop. But somewhere along the way, that empathy can get squeezed out because teachers and administrators are pressured from so many angles. So I love that notion of we really need to double down on that, double down on empathy and to bring that to our work. But one thing I love that you said, Ted, and I'd love for you to go into a little bit more, is the idea of professional advisory, because we hear a lot about it in terms of students, supporting students and helping them, connect them with resources. What do you mean from the professional, like the supporting teachers through advisory?
Well, when I work with schools, both teachers and school leaders, one of the first questions I ask them is, who do you calibrate with? What schools, what other school leaders do you calibrate with? And it's a vastness of superintendents as well. And it's astounding to me how limited that list has been. And one of the first pieces of homework I give them is like, okay, study the best schools in the world, and tell me who you want to calibrate with. And just that perspective,
Yeah.
because most of them will give me answers. So, oh, this school in my town, right? Or this, it's whatever it has the closest familiarity. But, you know, that's not how, if you are building a 5-star hotel on an island who's only have 1-star motels, and your only calibration is 1-star motels, it's going to be really hard to make up what a 5-star hotel looks like. And so that's that conversation. That's why these rituals are so simple. It's about saying, okay, who should we be calibrating with? And it's about relationships first. It's about the people and organizations and teams that you can learn about, you can build a relationship with, that help you get to the next level. And I don't think that's talked about enough. We talk about sharing of best practices, but practices is that rote stuff again. Oh, I'm going to watch how you smile, and I'm going to try to mimic how you smile. It sounds so ridiculous, but that's essentially what we're doing with most of the skills.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more.
I would like to add kind of another kind of challenge in trying to be innovative, and this teacher or principal wants to kind of move the edge a bit and say, I want to change my school environment. It's the idea. I think we've been promoted to by both state and federal policymakers and foundations and all that all of us can create these innovative schools and create this magic. And I think it's a dangerous false notion. And the reason, and let me give you an analogy. We all use maybe some iPhone products, Apple products, or we know about Tesla, right, in the car, right? We can describe how amazing it is. We can describe, the feat of engineering, how efficient, and we can describe their business model. We can do that all day long, right? But how many of us could actually engineer that car from scratch? How many of us could actually set up that whole organization? Very few of us. And in fact, this is why Tesla wasn't incubated and created inside of General Motors or Mercedes or BMW. They couldn't, because those conditions weren't right to do something that radical, right? Apple didn't start from inside IBM. It couldn't, because it was something that radical. And so the idea that even if we are individual entrepreneurs and innovators, you have to have the right conditions to be able to pull that off, even on a good day. And so you count the number of the percentage of the population could actually individually say, if you give them the right conditions, you can pull it off. It's probably 2% of the population to pull something off that big. And if you then see all those people locked up in all of these institutions, districts are not built to be innovators. They're built to be operators. So there's a big difference to be an operator user and saying, we're going to buy a Tesla car, we're going to use Apple, we're going to become so proficient using this tool and using it in ways that no one can imagine. And we could call that innovative, but we didn't create it. Right? And so the notion that a school by itself can go in a vacuum and create something from scratch, that is very, very unlikely. And I think it's a very discouraging thing for many educators who are trying to do this. So here's and I'll point out, like with even Napa New Tech, the first school, the amount of latitude and amount of mistakes we made, and we're able to kind of beg for forgiveness and fix them. I can't think of very many environments in the country. I could probably count on one hand that may even have the conditions that would allow that to happen again. In the charter world, you could never even pull it off. That's the crazy part. And we had the most unique conditions that I've not seen in 20 years replicated very often. Now, there's many conditions that can be created that can adopt models and improve on them. We can take an Apple product and use it in ways and adopt and take it to the next level of usage and even design. But starting from scratch is really tough. So I guess my big point here is to the entrepreneurs and innovators in education is that don't fight a losing battle and trying to innovate in a structure that's toxic to that. You might have to make some bigger drastic moves out there, or know that the job is to be a really good adopter,
right.
adopting with fidelity and improving on that usage so that you can take the use of that innovation to the next level. And that flies in the face of so many things like the innovation grants, all the high school school design challenges, all that. And I absolutely welcome any new school designs that can really pull something off. I mean, we need more of those. But are we, as an education institution, as a country, willing to accept, let's say, 90% failure in all these experimentations? And I would argue that regulators and communities have no tolerance for that. Right. They can't even stomach 5% failures in charter school world.
Right.
So the idea that, so that's the tension that I think is a big elephant in the room. That's really, you have a group of people who want to be innovators that under a false notion that they have the conditions to be able to pull it off and they'll be supported, and then another side which is really are you a better operator in creating the right conditions to adopt good practices?
That's a great, it's the difference between creation and appropriation, I think. And that makes a lot of sense. And there are some great models out there that we can learn from and draw on and adopt and reap some of those benefits without maybe going through all those challenges and all those struggles along the way. So it's great advice. Ted, I could talk with you all day, but I think I know you've got other things you need to do, but really appreciate the time you spent. I encourage everybody watching this, follow Ted on Twitter, @Ted Fujimoto. Tweets about deeper learning, creativity, innovation, empathy. You're just a wonderful, wonderful resource for folks. And I just want to say thank you for all of your contributions, not just today, but to all of us in education.
My pleasure. And thank you so much.